Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. That is Ryan Roberts, our director of recruiting. So we are going to carry and then discuss the decision by four-star running back Jayden Limar, who very shortly, we'll go to it when we get to that point in time, is going to be making his decision between Notre Dame, Michigan, Oregon, and Arizona. Ryan, this is a very interesting recruitment. I don't know how much time we're going to have to prep beforehand because he's supposed to go live very soon. But, there was a time in this when it looked like, actually he's going live now. So let's just go to it.
But first, tell us what the recruiting process has been like for you.
It's been great for me. Me and my family have been able to go to a lot of places, and it's really cool. And I've just been trying to look at all the good parts of it and seeing all these different types of schools. It's been amazing. So it's been great.
What's it meant to you to have your family and friends with you as you get set to make this decision?
It means a lot to me. We got a big family, as everybody knows. So it's really cool being able to share this moment with them.
Jayden, what kind of player is a prospective school getting out of you?
They're getting a versatile player. I can play running back. I can play receiver. I feel like I could catch the ball and run the ball about the same. So they're getting everything out of me.
All right, Jayden, sit tight. We'll get to your announcement in a moment. When we return, we will find out where Jayden Limar is headed. He will announce his commitment live.
Let's preview this one a little bit before we come back. Obviously, not surprising they're going to commercial. So let's discuss a little bit. Obviously, Michigan was a program that for a time, there were a lot of people in the Michigan beat that thought that this was going to be a Notre Dame a Michigan pickup, right? And Mike Hart is a guy that had developed a very good relationship with Jayden Limar, and he'd been on campus. He's been on campus in Michigan. Oregon went through a similar situation as Notre Dame as they went through a coaching change around the same time as Notre Dame. And so he had a new running backs coach come in. They got involved with him. He's been at Oregon more than any other school in his Final Four list, which makes sense when you consider geographically how much closer it is than all the other top schools. Arizona's another one. Scotty Graham, former Ohio State running back. Old people like me will remember Scotty Graham as a player, but he's the running backs coach at Arizona. He did a really nice job. And I'm going to tell you something right now, Ryan, and we can get into this later, but if Arizona starts winning, they're going to start getting some, not beating Notre Dame for kids, but they're going to start getting more and more, and maybe they will. They're going to start getting more and more kids because I'll tell you, Jed Fish has put together a pretty decent recruiting staff so far. And they've picked up some good players despite going 1-11 last year. So that's a positive sign. If you can land some kids like Tetaroa McMillan and some guys like that, and you win a 1-11, you're doing some nice things. So that's the 4 finalists. Now, it's interesting. Washington did not really push for him, it seems. And I don't know if that's because he wasn't super interested in Washington or vice versa. But I think that's a mistake, in my opinion, by Washington. And so we're going to carry his commitment once he does go live again to do it. We'll break down the film. We'll get in the film room tonight. We'll talk about what we like, maybe some things that we would like to see him improve on, how he fits into the defense, and what's next. So let's go back to Jayden.
All been waiting for. The stage is yours. Where will you be playing college football in 2023?
Man, first, I just want to thank God and all my family members for supporting me. Got a big family, and everybody had a hand in my success this year. And I want to thank Tracy Ford, everyone over at FSP. I want to thank all my high school coaches, Tri, Dinwiddie, Jimmy Lucier, everybody that's had any hand in my athletic ability. I want to thank all my siblings, Bubba, E, and Jada. I want to thank my parents especially. They've been through a lot, and they've overcame a lot, and it's just amazing that I get to share this experience with them. But that being said, I will be committing to play football at the University of Notre Dame.
There you go. There you go. A kiss from mom, and you're off to Notre Dame. What was it about Notre Dame that stood out to you over the other schools, Jayden?
I mean, honestly, everything. I love that they have God intertwined with everything that they do. I love the new coaches that they have, me, Marcus Freeman, and Dylan McCullough. We have a great relationship, and that just means everything to me. I've been looking for a family atmosphere, and I found it with them. So, yeah.
Man, I'll tell you what, if I was a big-time prospect like yourself, Jayden, I mean, I'd be pumped right now to play for Marcus Freeman. How pumped are you to play for Marcus Freeman? This is a guy that everybody's excited to see how he does in his first season there in South Bend.
Man, I'm super excited. I just can't wait to see what he does this next year. And then once I get there, I feel like we're going to take over college football. So I can't wait.
Well, you're joining a heck of a class, the #1 recruiting class in 2023. I mean, the guys on your squad coming in are some of the best in the nation, and you're adding on to that. Congrats again on your decision. But before I let you go, Jayden, tell all the Notre Dame fans what type of player they're going to be getting once you step foot on campus.
Man, they're getting everything. I'm going to be a versatile player for them, hopefully get to play for them from the jump, and they're getting a good person, so I can't wait to get there.
All right, Jayden Limar headed to Notre Dame. Jayden, thanks for joining us here on CBS Sports HQ. Again, congratulations on your commitment to the Fighting Irish. Wish you the best of luck. Look forward to watching you play down the road here.
Thank you.
All right, so Ryan, there you go. That is Jayden Limar. So Notre Dame gets another pickup. So it's gives them the #1 ranked class on Rivals. They actually had fallen to #2 because, again, it's a points-based system, and Texas Tech has 20 commitments. Notre Dame had 12, but Notre Dame now jumps ahead of Texas Tech. I think I might have said Texas A&M. I meant Texas Tech. And they were already #1 still on On3, the On3 consensus, ESPN, 24/7 Sports, the 24/7 Sports composite. They are now solidified that #1 spot. So, Ryan, let's get into the backstory. So when we were talking for a while about a commitment that we were expecting to happen the weekend of the Blue Gold game, this was it. So this is one that we've been expecting for a while. Their plan was originally that he was going to commit that weekend. They did some things that they decided they wanted to wait. He wanted to make sure that he took some visits and things along those lines. So that was the reason behind that. But it was never one where you felt like it wasn't going to end up this way. And there was never a time when it seemed like, okay, gee, are they losing their place? It was never anything like that. This is one that Jayden has been pretty locked into Notre Dame for quite some time. And like I said, we fully expected him to commit publicly in April. He privately committed, silently committed in April, but, those only go so far because when kids are going to take visits, that only goes so far for me.
Yep.
But he was a silent commitment. He is now a public commitment number 13 for Notre Dame. And now Notre Dame is back on the board at running back, Ryan. So essentially this was part of the decision. This is part of the reason they were comfortable telling Cedric Irvin, hey, look, we love you, but we don't have a spot for you, because they're getting a back that's very similar in style, but just better than what Cedric Irvin was.
Yeah, I mean, I've been pretty consistent with the fact that I've liked Jayden Limar's game for a long time. I think you comped him at some point to similar-ish to a Kyron Williams, maybe not as natural a receiver, but the style is similar.
It's not a receiver in regards to being able to do the wide receiver stuff, the lining up in the slot, running corner routes, things like that. But as out of the backfield, it's very, 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 very similar.
Yeah, and I had the ability to talk to Jayden Limar's high school coach today, Tom Try, who he mentioned in his little excerpt there, and going to have a little story on him in the background. I mean, this is a really good athlete, Brian. I think he's a really good, he's verified 4.53 in the 40-yard dash. Apparently he's jumped 40.5 inches while at the high school as well. So this is an explosive kid. I think he gives you a lot of potential to do a lot of versatile things. Like we just said, right? He was a running back, of course, used in the slot a little bit for his team. He can return kicks, return punts as need be. He can play defense. He played in their 4-2-5. He played like the overhang, like Sam Backer as well, too. So he plays all over the place. And then even when they had some injuries last year at quarterback, he would even come in and they would make their offense basically like a Wildcat system, right? So versatility is the biggest thing you're getting with Jayden Limar. I agree that him and Cedric Irvin Jr. have a little bit of a similar style. But I really think that Jayden Limar is just a little bit more athletic, which I think he has just a higher upside at the next level.
What I'm referring to when I compare them is how you're going to use them, how they're going to fit into the offense, what they do, what their skill set is, how they fit, the role, all that kind of stuff is the same, except for, like I said, I think Jayden's just a better player. It's no disrespect to Cedric Irvin Jr. He just was not a guy that we felt was a needle moving back. And I don't think Cedric is necessarily a needle moving back. What I think he does is he gives you a very natural runner who, my thing that I've said about him, Ryan, is I don't think he's necessarily great at anything, but I think he's good at everything. And that's, if I'm going to break his game down, that's how I would break it down is,
Sure.
There are other backs that are bigger, like we talk about Jeremiah Love, right? And we'll talk about him later. He's far more explosive. And this kid isn't like the super sudden like Kyron was. It's very similar. I think he's quicker than some people in our chat have given him credit for, but he's got vision. He's got a feel for the game. He's got all those type of things. Was very productive, over 1,500 yards last year against quality competition. I think he was close to 20 touchdowns, right? Total touchdowns. He was close to 20 total touchdowns.
23 touchdowns, as coach told me today. So,
yeah. And then he had like almost 400 receiving yards. A lot of the work he does is kind of out of the backfield, but then you watch him at 7-on-7s and he's running routes and, running corner routes. But again, 7-on-7 is different than doing pads on. So until I see him do those things with pads on, I'm not going to view him as a Kyron Williams type in that regard, because Kyron, we watched him do that with pads on. He was a 1,000-yard wide receiver as a sophomore. And so it's a little bit of a different animal, but the comparison to Kyron is similar body type, although Jayden's taller and thick, little bit thicker than Kyron was. Kyron was kind of stout. He's a little bit more muscular, I should say, is what I'm trying to say, than Kyron was. And just the comparison more so is the fit into the offense, but more so, I never loved anything about Kyron Williams' game. And still to this day, there's nothing that he's just great at, is in regard to being a pure running back, but he's just good everywhere, good speed. And that's going to be the interesting thing for him as a senior, Ryan, is does the testing speed, electronic 4.53, start to show up better on film? Because that's the one thing I don't see on film relative to the testing, is that breakaway speed. Because 4.53 electronic, if that's legit, is fast for a high school junior. I mean, that's a full over a tenth of a second faster than what Kyron Williams ran after 3 years at Notre Dame and 2 months training for the combine.
Sure.
Right. And so I think that's kind of, where you see, I don't see that level of just long speed yet, but I see quickness. I see the explosiveness. I see the hands. I see the vision. I see the feel for the game. And when you're running behind a Harry Heastand offensive line, you don't have to be Leonard Fournette. You don't have to be, pick a great running back that's out there. You don't have to be Breece Hall. You don't have to be those guys. You just have to be a guy that knows how to play, knows how to make reads, and will play with some toughness. And Florida Football Scout just let us know, Brian, actually we're having Brian Smith on here soon. The kid's tough. He's got some power. So good, and a good fit for what Notre Dame does on offense, in my opinion.
Well, I think the thing that made Kyron so good, and we're going to stick with that comparison for a second, is the fact that he was just such a competitive dude. And I think that translated to his running style, his energy that he put onto the field, and then also his ability as a pass blocker. I'll tell you this, Brian, when I talked to his coach today, Jayden Limar, the thing that he applauded most about him was his effort as a pass blocker. He said that is, and that's something that you don't see on film, right? Because he's not going to put that on a huddle highlight reel. Right. But this kid just does everything very well. And you could tell even when he was answering that, he's not like a showy person where he's going to talk a lot about how great he is, but you can tell there's a subtle confidence there, right? And I think that's kind of where the comparison lays. I feel like he's a very confident kid in what he does. So I think it's a really good pickup for Notre Dame.
The story is interesting, Ryan, like how it got here. I think he liked Notre Dame and he liked Lance Taylor. I don't know if I would have said I felt Notre Dame was a school that was going to land him at that time, however.
Right.
And Dylan McCullough comes in. There's a brief period of, okay, let me look at the board, see what we got. And it was pretty quick. I don't know if it was a week, 2 weeks from the time he was hired. It was pretty quick that it was like, yeah, okay, Jayden Limar's the guy that I want. And zeroed in on him. And even with Jeremiah Love on the board, and even with Cedric Irvin already committed, and even with, obviously they were still trying to recruit Richard Young, and there's other backs, Justice Haynes and all those kind of guys that have been on the board. This is a guy that from, like I said, very quickly upon getting in there, looking at the film, figuring out who he wants, was a guy that Dylan McCullough prioritized and said, that's a guy that I want to add to this class. And they got it done. But it was an interesting recruitment, because there was a long time between he had last visited and when he committed to Notre Dame. I mean, because when he visited in April, he hadn't been on campus since the fall, right? If I remember correctly, since the game in the fall.
Yep.
He's a lot like Devin Houston in that
you took it, man. I was going to say his recruitment. It reminded me a lot of Devin Houston's recruitment.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, because it was just a long break from visit to commitment. Didn't make another visit, but for what but Notre Dame hit all the right chords and from the Zoom meetings and the phone calls and the face interact, like all those types of things. They knocked it out of the park without getting him back on campus. So I thought that there was a lot of parallels to the Devin Houston. And it was even more impressive because the visit time to commitment time was even a longer stretch. So, man, really impressive.
He committed before getting back on campus. Like, or at least Devin Houston committed where, Marcus Freeman was the head coach. Al Washington had been hired. I think the only coach that hadn't been hired yet when Devin Houston visited in January was Al Golden, I believe. Right. And so it's a similar situation here where Jayden gave Notre Dame a silent commitment. And I think that's part of the reason he didn't want to necessarily go public right away, is because let me get on campus. Let me make sure this is cool. This fits, this works, and all that kind of stuff. And, I won't be surprised if we see like a cool video come out at some point in time too, from some things I was told, but we'll see if that pans out or not here moving forward. But this is a kid, Ryan, that has some ability, has some talent. I think that's important too. And I think it's an interesting note. I was trying to find this last night, and this is one of those many, many times that I wish Loose Emoji was still with us, because this used to be just something I could figure out with a quick phone call. I know it's been a while, at least since the Rivals era started. Notre Dame has not signed very many Washington kids at all. I mean, you think back to like Carlos Pierre-Anton way back in the day, but like Kavari Russell, I believe, was the only Washington kid that Notre Dame actually landed up until Tobias Merriweather last year, I believe. And now they've gotten a Washington kid in back-to-back years. And this is smart recruiting by Notre Dame, is go to places that produce talented players, because we've talked about this before. The state of Washington it produces good players. It doesn't necessarily produce a lot of players, but it's producing good players, and they've produced several 5-star caliber kids. We had Tobias Merriweather at SI All-American and at Irish Breakdown as a top 50 national player. Ohio State got a 5-star receiver from Washington the year prior. There's the Savell Smalls kid, who was a 5-star kid who stayed in home at Washington. But when a team like that is down, you need to take advantage and go get some of those kids. And right now, Washington is down. And that's something that I'm not saying this to rub it into Antoine's face, but that's something that Mark D'Antoni and his staff did a great job of at Michigan State, is during that time when it was like the Rich Rod and the Brady Hoke era, that's when Michigan State ascended, because they took advantage of the dysfunction and landed some kids that they normally wouldn't have got in state and in Ohio and places like that. And Notre Dame is taking advantage while they can of being able to get that kind of player. And so this is now back-to-back years, despite not having signed a single Washington kid in the previous, I think, 15 years, or one in 15 years, Kavari Russell. It's the only one that I can remember in the last 15, 20 years. I think going all the way back to Carlos Pierre-Anton. I'm sure somebody could find that out for me, but you now get them in back-to-back years, and both skill players, I think is important. And then, of course, keeping them off the West Coast and things like that. So that's another interesting angle to this whole thing, in my opinion. Yeah, somebody said Lake Dawson was from Washington. His brother Lewis, who signed with Notre Dame, also was from Washington, but that's going back to the 90s. Carlos Pierre-Anton was after that. I mean, it's been a long time. It's been a long time since they've been able to have this kind of success in the state of Washington.
No, I think it's a great point, Brian. You have to take advantage when the premier programs are. I mean, let's take a step back, I guess, from calling Washington a premier program, but they are a program that dominates in their state because they are the best football in their state, typically, right? So
it's a big program. I mean, look, they've won a national championship since the last time Notre Dame won a championship. They've won one since then, right? I mean, they're one of the 3 or 4, in my opinion, best West Coast programs. How about that? They're not a national power, but they're definitely a regional powerhouse. Yeah. This isn't like beating Arizona for Kid in Arizona, right? I mean, that's my point when I talk about it.
Yeah, no, I get that. And Washington produces talent, so there's obviously players that are going to the University of Washington. So totally get that. But I mean, it goes the same regionally, right? Like it's like the Texas thing that we keep talking about, right? While the state of Texas teams right now, University of Texas, Texas Tech, Texas A&M to a degree, like when those teams aren't premier, you also got to go into the state of Texas, right? And I know Florida is going to be a tougher animal to consistently get a lot of volume of players from, but right now the state of Florida is down from a team-to-team perspective to a degree, right? I know that everyone's excited about Mario Cristobal down there coming in and doing the recruiting prowess that he has, but until they turn it around, it's still a little bit down. So I think that right now, getting out there, like you said, getting some West Coast talent, because you're gonna think, at least in my opinion, with USC now getting Lincoln Riley and heading in a better direction, it's going to be a little tougher to get kids out of California comparative to a couple recent years, right? So getting a kid out of Washington, a premier back-to-back years, I think is paramount. I think it is. You have to take advantage of when programs are down. I think that's right. especially when you're Notre Dame that recruits nationally. Like that is a paramount thing for me.
Right. And then now all of a sudden that helps you with your ability to have success in the future when maybe that if Washington does get better. And it is a little harder because let's be honest, Washington was a pain in Notre Dame's behind for a few years during the Brian Kelly tenure. And this isn't a shot at Brian Kelly. I mean, Jimmy Lake was hard to beat for kids out there. Not just Washington kids like Kyler Gordon, but they beat him for Asa Turner, who was from California. They beat him for, they weren't ever, Notre Dame was never like the number 2 school for Trent McDuffie, but they tried to get in there with him and he wasn't at all interested and he ends up going to Washington. So they've had trouble getting those kids. I think Josh Garnett was from the state of Washington and he was a kid that Notre Dame wanted. But
didn't they like that Irvin kid, the safety too?
Yes, Cedric Irvin. But he was from California, I believe. He went to Washington and he actually committed. If I remember, he was going to commit to Notre Dame or did commit it to Notre Dame at one point in time. We're going to bring Brian Smith here into this conversation. But, like you said, it's not going to be a volume. Washington's not going to have a high volume of players, and people are talking about some of the guys that Notre Dame has got from there. But there's Kavari Russell being one. There's good skill players there. And if you can get a kid or two a year, that's a good place to go, in my opinion. And so, Ryan, we were talking so you had Kavari Russell in 2013, Tobias Merriweather last year. Last guy I remember them getting from Washington was Carlos Pierre-Anton. Prior to that, I can't remember anybody except the Dawson brothers, Lewis and Lake Dawson. I can't remember, and they were a couple years apart, I believe, but I can't remember Notre Dame getting back-to-back kids from the state of Washington in my lifetime, that I can remember.
There's been a lineman or two. The kid that played like 94 to 96, something like that. One of the Parsegian family or somebody that was related. But that's been forever ago. Yeah, for whatever reason, the Northwest has not been a priority. I'm not saying that it's loaded, right, but to not get anybody is kind of odd because Notre Dame is such a national program. Yeah. I'm not sure what that stems from. It's pretty interesting, actually.
Obviously there just hasn't been a huge attraction too. I mean, Notre Dame has tried to recruit there. You have to give the staff some credit. I mean, they went out there and tried to get some guys. They tried to get after Savell Smalls and did some things maybe they shouldn't have, which got one of the coaches a little slap on the wrist. But the Pacific Northwest has added, now this is going to be the third kid of the last 5 years that they've got from the Pacific Northwest, if you want to include Braden Lindsey, who is from the state of Oregon. So
that's who I was going to mention.
Right. Yeah. So that's 3 pretty good football players when you look at Braden Lindsey plus Tobias Merriweather and now Jayden Limar. So anytime you can get – and Brian, you and I have talked about this before – the more you add from a region, the easier it is to continue to add to the region. And you've now got 2 really good football players from that state in back-to-back years. Again, this isn't some sleeper kid that nobody's ever heard of. This is the best running back in the state. Last year, you got the best wide receiver in the state. You add kids like that, then next year, if there's a kid next year that you're trying to go after, then it's going to make it a little bit easier for you.
That's especially true where I live. And for those people who don't know, I live in Tampa. Florida kids are the most unique in the country by a landslide. But even in areas that are more pro Notre Dame, it's always cool because I know these kids tell me this stuff. When they're being recruited, pick a school, Notre Dame or otherwise, if there's a kid they know at that school, there's going to be some connection made and say, hey, what do you think? Maybe it's they call them directly, they find out, Twitter, whatever. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5, when the next kid comes along, especially if he's not, quote unquote, as likely to pick Notre Dame, at least there's a connection. If you try to get that top 5 national player and you have nobody on your roster from his area, even if you're Alabama, that's hard. They want to know what it's like to live in Tuscaloosa. So Notre Dame is making some inroads there, and it's probably in some ways going to help them with some of the Northern California kids, maybe even LA, because it's still West Coast, and they all associate with being Pac-12 area players. So I'm never against recruiting California. So that's something else to think about too.
And there's some kids from Washington I know Notre Dame would like to get in on this year. Caleb Presley's a kid they're still trying on and just haven't had a ton of success with him. Josiah Wagner's a kid that they just recently offered from the state of California. So maybe getting a Jayden Limar is enough to at least convince Tobias Mailer is enough to at least convince Caleb Presley to visit again. That's kind of how it goes. And when you look at Washington, for example, we were talking about the NFL access or the NFL production. Again, I'm going to look off I believe this is based off 2020 rosters is the latest data that I've been able to find, but there was 18 kids from the state of Washington, which have been produced, which again, not high volume, but here's the kids that here's a list of some of the guys the state has produced: Buda Baker, Desmond Trufant, Kavari Russell, Zach Banner, Danny Shelton, Miles Jack, Cooper Kupp, Jermaine Kearse, David DeCastro. So some pretty impact players and a lot of high draft picks. So again, when you can get the best kids from that state, they're going to produce some NFL kids every year. It's not a ton, but they're going to produce NFL kids. And Notre Dame, in my opinion, has got one for sure from last year. And then, just seeing how – look, I'll say this. Am I projecting Jayden Limar to be an NFL draft pick? I'm not right now. I view him as like a top 250 caliber kid right now. And we'll get into his film here in a little bit more, but he's further along than where I thought Kyron Williams was at the time when he was being recruited as a junior as a pure running back. And so if the kid's willing to work, and as Ryan pointed out before you joined the show, Brian, kid's confident. He's athletic and confident, and that's a real nice combination at running back.
I'll take a kid like him, especially for the spread offense. I posted this in the chat. Catches the ball well. He's running between the tackles. There was a couple of plays. I was watching his highlights a minute ago. He literally ran over kids, and it's like those people have mothers too, and it's a speed gear that's it was bad, and there's a speed gear that some kids just don't reach, and when he hits, he's especially in the state of Washington, they walk off the field. They're not going to catch him, so he's going to be an effective college running back. I just hope that they find a niche for him early because I didn't realize how good his hands were. I don't know if I've forgotten or what, but he really catches the ball well. And he's not afraid of contact. There's always a place for a running back like that in a spread offense.
Ryan, any final thoughts before we dive into the film?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just one thing. Brian, I was talking, Smitty, I was talking to Brian before you came on. And when I was talking to Lamar's head coach today, he was just telling me that the most impressive thing about him that's not going to show up on a highlight tape is that he's an excellent pass blocker. So you're talking about the spread off. Yeah, you're talking about the spread offense fit, man. If you can pass block, you can catch, and you can run between the tackles, you can play, man. So I'm all there for it.
I can't remember the last time a high school coach told me his running back was good in pass protection. That's like the automatic fail. So that's great to hear.
It might explain why Dylan McCullough likes him. I mean, and again, you've got a running backs coach who's done a pretty good job identifying not highly ranked guys and that turn out to be really good football players.
True.
And in a good skill set. So hey guys, let's bring up the film. So let's watch a little bit of film here and let you guys do most of the talking here. But just want to dive up here we go again. This nonsense. Let's see here. I gotta change my system preferences apparently. So just give me a second, everybody, because Google, when we lost power the other day, Ryan, I told you about that, right? When the knuckleheads from Indiana Power, Brian, I'll have to tell you this story here one of these days. But yeah, they basically came over and turned our power off because they were switching over the meter and without calling us and telling us. And Angela and I both, as you know, work from home. So that was not well received. And the breaking of my fence in the backyard was even especially not well
fantastic
received. So
fantastic.
I had some really interesting phone calls that I had to make. So some people heard some things from me. They heard some things from me. So you're just going to have to bear with me a second. Actually, let's just try it this way. All right. Let's see if it works this way because we were just sharing a second ago. There we go. Okay, we're just going to try it a different way. All right, so let's watch some Jayden Limar film, everybody. And I think the first thing you're going to notice, I really like his feet. I don't think he's a super sudden guy, but I think he's a very nimble guy with very good balance. That's the first thing that stands out for me.
Mm-hmm.
Short strider.
Yeah, I think he's a very natural inside zone runner. I think he's got really quick feet, like you said. I think he's got good vision. I think he just kind of navigates space really well. He understands how to sift through traffic really well inside, which is surprising because he's not the biggest guy in the world, but I think he's a really successful inside runner.
He's listed at 5'11". I still don't see that. I have not seen that as I've watched this kid.
He's like 5'9.5",
5'10".
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's okay. Running back, I'm not concerned if,
Yeah.
I bet with his athleticism, he can still dunk a basketball.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing that stands out to me too is like, you look at like a guy like Jeremiah Love. Jeremiah Love's taller, thicker, far more explosive. But the thing about Jayden is with Jeremiah, there's a lot to still learn about playing running back. This kid is a very natural football player. Like you see him, he's patient when he needs to be patient, and then he can put his foot in the ground and explode vertical. But there's a lot to be said for finding these kids that they just know how to play. The position is just natural to them. Mm-hmm. And that's what you need. The vision is there. You see it even with that cut. But when I refer to vision, I'm referring to the ability to see anticipate the second level defender, read the first level defenders, and get the ball out there. Those are things that you really like about this kid. That's nice acceleration right there.
It is.
After getting yanked back, he sees that thing and splits it quick.
I think he's going to be really nice in the screen game as well, which he's utilized at Lake Stevens a ton too. Because again, I think that he has a really good knack for navigating space, and I think he has just a really good peripheral vision and just seeing what's in front of him and what's developing around him.
And that's that balance I'm talking about, right? Like this is not a touchdown if you're playing against Alabama, but it is a 5-yard gain. That's the thing, that balance right there. And he just keeps putting forward. And Brian, what you talk about is like he didn't run anybody over there, but that's good strength. I mean, he just runs right through that stuff, keeps that leg, the legs really churning, keeps working forward, gets into the end zone, and he acts like he's been there before, which I always love.
He seems like a pretty mature kid. Like he didn't do all the hat baloney and stuff like that. He just, I'm going to Notre Dame. I like the fact that he comes from that background.
Does nobody in this league like study film? How many times are they going to burn him with this screen? It's the same. It's like they do the same thing every time, and it's like nobody's prepared for it.
It's just a halfback middle screen, man. It's not nothing fancy.
Yes, like that right there. Like this is what I'm referring to. Like I just don't see the 4.53 speed that people talk about, but that's okay. I mean, he's still plenty fast. But I also wonder, Brian. Because we had that, we liked Jadarian Price's speed as a junior, but it wasn't like, oh wow, home run. It's like, hey, look, he's got plenty of speed, but he's not a super explosive guy. Well, then when you went and saw him as a senior, that was based off junior film. But when you went and saw him as a senior, we found out then that he was injured all year last year. He just played through it, and that's why he wasn't explosive. Like, oh, okay, makes sense. And then as a senior, you see that explosiveness, and of course, as a freshman at Notre Dame so far, he's been incredibly explosive. So, maybe there's something like that there with Jayden too. That's a really nice read and cut.
Yep.
His ability to make a cut in close quarters is going to serve him very, very well with the inside zone and stuff like that. He's going to grind out yards that other backs would not.
Yep.
And I think he's a little more he's a little, I mean, we keep comparing him to Kyron Williams, but I think Kyron kind of always played as a more like durable, finish forward type of back, like a very slippery dude. I really think that this kid is just a little more natural, at least at this age, of just kind of reading things in front of him and to the side of him. Like I think he just has kind of a knack for understanding when to cut, where the second level defender is going to be, where's the replacement defender to that second level defender. Like I think he just has a knack for playing the position, and that's a nice little finish to the run there.
Yeah, that's one of those children that his mother's unhappy.
Yeah. And there's someone in the chat talking about how he's slow. He's not slow. Like if we're having like real discussions here, there's a difference between not being fast and being slow. It's not slow.
If you look at his offer list, it would not include those institutions if he was quote unquote slow.
From
That's
Washington.
Not a conversation.
Also, speed is one of the more overrated aspects of being a very good college running back. Cardinal Williams right now is 4.7.
Yep.
Yeah. His vision and his
Physical
ability to
run.
catch the ball is going to get him in the lineup in some capacity. What was it McCullough said? He needed a third down back, a guy that can pass block, etc. This guy checks more than one box. So he's got a chance to play in multiple packages in multiple situations.
Yeah, and he doesn't have to. He could be a really good situational back, but he doesn't have to just be, to your point, Brian, he doesn't have to just be a situational back. He can be an every down back. This is what I'm talking about. This isn't slow. This is patience. Like, okay, where's the hole? Okay, now let me hit it. Okay, bam, let me find that cut and get vertical. What some people need to understand about being a running back is sometimes if you're going as fast as you can, the moment you get the ball, you're not doing it right.
Yeah. Randy Kinder, how you doing?
There you go.
Those are nice ball skills on that wheel right there too, finishing through contact. That was pretty nice. Good concentration through the catch.
He reminds me a little bit of Mike Hart.
Interesting. Yeah. Similar body type coming out of high school. Absolutely. Catches with his hands, gets both feet down. He's got some really impressive, Brian. I don't know if you've seen it, but he's got some really impressive 7-on-7 film as like a slot. He'll catch some stuff out of the backfield, but also as a slot. Tracks that deep ball really well right there.
Well, that's something I was going to ask you. I have not watched his 7-on, but I mean, I go to more of those than I'd like to admit. Yeah. If you can catch like that, again, that's just another way to find yourself on the gridiron. And this just in, Notre Dame is not exactly deep at wide receiver right now.
Right. So. Here's another thing, too. If you're not a natural pass catcher, this is actually harder than those balls he was where he had to slow up and turn his hips forward. Tracking a ball over your shoulder is one of the harder things to do if you don't have natural ball skills.
Yeah.
And there he does. He's quite the main on that kid, a little quarterback.
Yeah, I think he was a freshman from what the coach said, the quarterback.
And you said, Ryan, he also has a freshman brother who rushed for over 10 touchdowns on that team.
Really?
Oh, yes. Wow. Smitty, get this one. Apparently, Jayden ran for like 23 touchdowns this year. His younger brother, who was a freshman last year, ran for 14 as well. So
something tells me the brother has some athleticism as well. That's quite a few for a kid that's 14, 15 years old.
Yep.
There's a little Kyron-esque stiff arm there.
This is a well-rounded player. I don't see how anybody could be disappointed with Notre Dame picking this kid up.
This is another one, Ryan, too, guys, that again, this is where you see he doesn't have – I don't see the 4.5 on this play either, right? Like I just –
get in the corner, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't see the burst.
Right. He's got a better vertical burst than he does, that speed to just get to the perimeter.
Right.
Which, again, I'm very curious to kind of see – yeah, I'm curious how he sees as a senior. Is he a kid that just got faster as a senior? And so you're seeing the 4.5s this offseason, and we'll see it more as a senior on film, or some guy. But see, look, Brian, you know this too, especially down in Florida. There's a lot of kids that are really fast in track that don't play fast in football.
Yeah, because they're scared to death.
Right.
Yeah,
and then vice versa. And sometimes not scared to get. It's just different skill set. And some guys just can't run as fast out of a stance as they can out of the blocks. It's strange, but it happens from time to time.
And with this level of pay, so the backstory real quick before I make my point is that their quarterback got injured multiple times during the season. So Jayden was the player that the coaching staff trusted to kind of be that replacement quarterback. So they went to a Wildcat system and this team made it to the state championship this year too. So they were a good football team.
This is probably the most explosive to the corner I've seen him.
Yeah, he put his foot in the ground there.
Yeah.
And I think that was in the playoffs too when he was playing quarterback. So that was probably against a decent team that he just had that run against. So,
does anybody know what his number 2 choice was? Just out of curiosity.
You know what? I don't know that for a fact. My understanding is it was Michigan or Oregon were the next 2 that he was looking at. I don't know which one was above which.
Well, that answer leads into the following, and to your earlier point, it's why Notre Dame needs to at least kick the tires on the top 5 players in that state over the next couple of years. For Washington not to finish in the top 3 for arguably the best player in the state is a bad sign for their program.
It's very telling.
That's sad, actually.
But as you'll know, Brian, the people that cover Washington, as they say about every other kid that they don't get, well, they just didn't want him.
Here we go.
Just didn't want him. I was like, okay, that's actually a worse admission than they just didn't get him. Like, okay, so you're also bad at evaluating talent as well. That doesn't really help your case a whole ton. So that is film of Jayden Limar, everybody. Good running back. That's the thing, is this a, oh my gosh, the gap is closing type of player? No. What this does is this gives you another good football player to make sure that your room as a whole is closing the gap. And it continues what we feel about the current running back group. I don't think there's a future Heisman Trophy winner on the current roster. And if there is, it's the freshman, right? Just with his unique skill set. It's just a lot of good football players that have comparable skill sets. And that's the key, right? And he's another one of those guys. And I like the fact that when you look at the other backs they're looking at, and we kind of transition into the what's next, right? So as we look at the what's next aspect of running back recruiting at Notre Dame, there's really 2 players on the board as of right now. Now, there's some other guys that I've heard that maybe they're talking to is like, let's see how it goes here and all that kind of thing, because they would like a second back in this class. But the top 2 on the board right now are Jeremiah Love and Richard Young. And if you look at the trio, right, and we'll talk about where things stand in a second. We're just going to talk about where they are as players in the fit. If somehow Notre Dame were to pull off one of the biggest recruiting upsets of the last 20 years, in my opinion, and get Richard Young, which I think we would all agree on that, right? If we're being honest, that would give them, and get Jeremiah Love, it would give them 3 uniquely different players. Richard Young is more of a big, thick, every down, big time back. Jayden is the third down, can also be a first and second down back, gives you the pass catching, the pass blocking, the ability to catch out of the backfield. And then Jeremiah Love is your Dexter Williams. He's your guy that only needs 7 carries to get to 100 yards. Remember how Dex was in 2017? He had, I think he was like 36 carries and like 360 some yards. It's like 9 point something per carry. That's Jeremiah Love. And it is interesting when you combine the 3 of them. It does give me a similar feel to a better version of what Notre Dame had in 2017 when you had Josh Adams as your guy. You had Tony Jones Jr., who was kind of your do-it-all guy. And then you had Dexter Williams, who was your home run hitter, right? And you have that kind of unique combination of skills. That trio would do it. But at the same time, if you only get 2 of them, you're still getting complementary players. So Jeremiah Love is interesting because he's a guy that Notre Dame was looking at from the standpoint of, we're just going to recruit him as an athlete. Right. Mm-hmm. And because we just like him. You can't turn down that 6'1", you can't turn down that speed, you can't turn down that playmaking ability, and we need to have more success in St. Louis. That's the thought process for Notre Dame, which check in agreement, right? All of it. So you recruit him. Well, now that Cedric Irvin's not in the class, now you can talk to Jeremiah Love as like, no, now we get a chance to play you where we really like you the best, which is running back. We get to start you where we like you the best, which is running back. And I think that's certainly going to help their recruitment. And then you look at what the potential 1-2 punch was of Cedric Irvin and Jayden Limar. I still think it would have been tough to convince Jeremiah Love to come here to Notre Dame in that scenario. I think as much as he likes Notre Dame, I still think he wants to be a running back. And I think it'd be tough to convince him of that. And I think that would have been the one thing that maybe could have hurt their chances. But now you look at it and you say, okay, now you talk about it. And the thing I didn't love about that 1-2 punch is I feel Cedric Irvin and Jayden Limar are basically the same guy, except Jayden's a little better. But they bring very similar skills to the table. Brian, you've seen Cedric in person. I mean, are they different guys? Do they bring a whole lot different to the table? Or to me, they're very similar players as far as the impact they're going to have on the depth chart and the roles they're going to have in the offense.
Limar is definitely stronger. I didn't realize how much potency he had in the upper body. Cedric has more speed than I thought, but of course I'd seen him last fall. Then I went to a practice a couple of weeks ago. He can scoot, but he just doesn't have the upper body power, and he's not a traditional running back. He's a spread running back and a guy you put in the slot. Now,
which is the same role that Jayden Limar is basically going to be playing.
But he's just offense. Between the tackles, Jayden's going to be a better player for college.
But that's kind of my point, though, right? Like, you're not going to use Jayden on things and then use Cedric for something completely different. They're kind of the same guy, right? Yeah. And that's kind of my point is where when you look at Jayden Limar, and now if you're able to land Jeremiah Love and put those two together, and if you're not on the message board, you need to get on there because we had a really long update the other day, and we had some interesting Jeremiah Love stuff in there. But you add those two guys together, now all of a sudden you've got a shifty, slotty type of running back that can be effective between the tackles, who to me can be a 12 to 15 carry per game guy. I think Jayden Limar, Brian, to your point, he's got that thick lower body.
Yeah.
He's going to keep filling out. He can be a plus touch guy. And then you've got Jeremiah Love, who is that guy that he only needs 10 touches to do what other guys do on 15, right? And he brings some length and some different skills to the table. And you see a much better 1-2 punch with that duo than what you would have seen with an Irvin Lamar duo. And I think that just gives them a chance for an even better running back depth chart, or running back class, I should say, in 2023 than you would have, even though Cedric Irvin's a 4-star caliber recruit and a nice player that I liked, but he was always going to be the lowest ranked guy in the class. I can't say that that's going to be true of Jayden Limar. And I know that's not true, because I'm already going to have him ranked ahead of at least one guy in the class right now. So I think this sets up the potential. The move of Irvin coming out of the class and adding Lamar get you back to 13, but your 13 now is better than what your 13 was a week ago, in my opinion.
Quick note as a sidebar to the state of Washington, Philip Riley did live up there for a while. He was there for a year or two.
That's right. He kind of lived all over the place. That's right. But he played his
stepdad's military.
What was last year in Washington? Was it sophomore or junior year? Sophomore years?
He moved down here by me about 30 minutes from where I live, beginning of his junior year, and he had 0 offers. Nobody knew who he was. Into the year, he had like 35.
And then obviously there's Richard Young, right? Richard Young's the last part of this one.
I could do an hour show on Richard Young. Literally, nobody's seen him more than me, and I know him well. That is not normal. Here's the scary part. When I went to see him a couple weeks ago, it was right before Notre Dame started recruiting him. Of course, it's Florida. 3 o'clock, what's it do? It rains, it lightning as soon as frickin' practice starts. Richard, myself, and some other people go inside, and they're working on film. They're changing their whole set of what they're going to do. He hadn't been coached all that great, and they were changing everything because they didn't like anything they were doing, and he's arguably the best running back, power back in the country, and doing everything wrong. So his eyes were down when he got the ball, wrong angle, hadn't been taught how to catch the ball.
You could see him like reaching for the ball on high school film.
Yeah, lots of things. So unfortunately for the players in that area of Fort Myers, you're going to get run over more next year. So good luck to you. Richard's as motivated as a kid as I've ever seen. I watched him squat 490 when he was 15. So he's literally, nobody was near the rack. He was by himself. So he's very, very motivated.
Kid's a freak, man. He's a freak.
Yeah.
He is he's a scarily built player for his age.
Like he looks like he's a college senior.
He doesn't look like he leaves the weight room. Like he's just that type of dude.
He was the exact same thing, 8 or 9 pounds less when he was 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He was 190 when he was 15. Was 0 body fat.
He is a strong, explosive dude, to say the least. He's got pretty good speed too. I was surprised. I was like, hey, he can scoot a little bit.
He doesn't have a first step gear yet. That's one thing he's working on. But once he takes that second step, if he's going north south, you're making business decisions as a tackler.
Yeah. Yes.
I've seen that from a vertical. Him run through the hole. Oof.
That's one thing that him and Jeremiah Love both have is I don't think Love has the most sudden first step either, but when he gets to his second gear, he can fly.
Oh yeah, Love. You can punch the ticket there, buddy. You can strike up the band. Yeah, it's 6. So yeah, not many people are like Richard though with the power with that speed. That's why he had 30 offers before his sophomore year or some crap like that. It was ridiculous.
So speaking of Jeremiah Love, what I would like to do now is I would actually like to bring up his film so we can kind of look at it and just kind of talk about that comparison between the two players when you look at him compared to a Jayden Limar, because I think we would all agree that Notre Dame's best chance at getting a second back in this class is Jeremiah Love. And that's not exactly what I would call a consolation prize, but I think he's built very much like Josh Adams. Ryan, you talked about this in our last show. I think he runs more like CJ Procise, a little bit shiftier than Josh was. But he's a really he it's hard not to think Josh Adams a lot when you watch him play, when you see the explosiveness and all that. I think there's a little bit more elusiveness, and also the positional flexibility is why I like the CJ Procise. But it just is a pure running back, Brian. I think your Josh Adams comparisons make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a little bit. He's a high-legged kid, right? That has long strides, and he can absolutely fly. Like that's the comparison. He's going to be 6'1", maybe 6'1", and even some change. And I think he's going to be 215 before you know it. But I wouldn't necessarily call him a power back. Like this is a one cut and go. This is like an outside zone runner who has home run speed. That's what I see with Jeremiah Love.
Right, and that's why. And I think the Josh Adams comparisons are good. Josh wasn't exactly a powerful back either. He's a lot like those 2017 backs. Now, this is all against DeSmet Jesuit. These last 2 long runs, this is against DeSmet Jesuit. So, I mean, there's like at least 2 to 3 Division I defensive backs and defensive players on that roster. And he's just ripping them. He's a pretty good football player. Very and the thing about Jeremiah is he's still to me, still kind of new to running back. Obviously, 2020 was kind of cut short because of COVID. 2019, he actually played more defense than he did offense.
Yep.
And then this past season, he was splitting carries with a kid who I think he was a 1AA kid. I think is where he went. The starting running back on their team, I believe, went to a 1AA school. I could be wrong on that. I could be having to confuse somebody else. But now this year, you expect Jeremiah to be more of the guy. But Brian, I don't know if you are familiar with the stats. See, this play right here this isn't something that Josh Adams really did. You know, if you got to Josh in the backfield, it was going to be a tackle for loss. I mean, that was just the reality of it. I think this is why I really like Jeremiah. But Brian, he had almost 1,000 yards as a junior and didn't have 100 carries. He had less than 100 carries and still had over 900, almost 1,000 yards last year.
Yeah. It was almost 11 yards a carry. It was just ridiculous. And when
some of those cuts right there are just 1 foot in the ground too. That's a great sign.
And that's what I like that's why I think the CJ comparison works the best for me is that right there. Again, Josh Adams, as good as he was, can't do that. He just doesn't have that. Josh was a lot more leg than I think, even though their height's not too different. Josh this kid has more torso. And Josh had very long legs, and that's not exactly an ideal thing for a running back, in my opinion. That's why you don't see a lot of 6'2" backs.
He's a very sudden back, very sudden.
Mm-hmm.
I think his upside is tremendous too, because like you said, I want to see what type of numbers he puts up this year as the guy, right? Because that's
another year and a full year under his belt now. Yes, you're 100% right.
Exactly.
And if you see pictures of him, he was kind of a skinny kid last year. He's starting to fill out his frame too, which is another thing I'm looking forward to seeing from Jeremiah Love. And there's some clips. I don't know if it's in here or if in the game film that I saw, but there's some clips I have of him running like vertical routes on the outside as a receiver and winning one-on-one contested throws. I don't know if it's on here or if it's on the game film, but we'll see here in a little bit if it comes up. But he can catch the ball out of the backfield too. He's another guy that could play receiver if you need him to. And Notre Dame had talked to him about maybe being a safety when they thought that they were going to be full at running back, but then obviously they made the decision to. That's a nice cut right there. That's 2 nice cuts. Like to jump cut out and then bam, see that and then get vertical. That's a nice play. Put the ball in the outside arm, kid.
It's a high school junior, Brian. He'll be all right.
I know. Would you see that from NFL guys and D1 guys where they just get tossed in one hand? Like get the ball on the outside arm.
Yep. Yeah, and when I talked to him before, he said, you know, I can be a corner, I can play safety, I can play wide receiver. Like he's just that dude.
Yeah.
Do we really think that he can play corner?
He thinks he can.
That's what he said. That's what he said.
Well, a lot of kids tell me that down here too, but corners.
The point is more of the willingness to do whatever is more.
I like that. That I do like.
Like wherever you need me, like that's a nice move right there. Brian, you got to watch this freshman DB film. I definitely see safety. I don't think he's a corner either, but I definitely see safety. But he moves. He's got some fluidity to him. There's no doubt about it. I just think his upside is greater as an offensive player. And normally I'm the opposite. Smitty, you know this. Normally, if a kid's 1 or 2, I play him on defense. Like I'm like that way with Micah Bell. I'm like that with Micah Tees. But there's 2 kids in this class that I think are two-way players that I actually like better on offense. Jeremiah Love is one. Ronan Hannafin's the other.
Well, I hope they don't have to take Ronan Hannafin based on who they're recruiting at linebacker. That's another story.
You mean don't have to take him at linebacker? Agree. Yeah, he's an offensive. He's more of a rover. He's a rover if he's on defense. But to me, he's more of a. Alabama's recruiting him as a safety, which is
really?
Yeah, they see him as like a safety hybrid outside, like hybrid sort of rover type.
Oh, they're going to play him at the star position.
Yeah. Notre Dame
that's
wants
what
him a
Nick called him.
receiver.
Huh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yep. Notre Dame wants him a receiver. And I personally like him better on offense. And I was back and forth for a long time. I mean, I remember we were talking about him a couple months ago, Ryan, and I was like, on Monday, I like him better at receiver. On Tuesday, I like him better at safety. On Wednesday, I like him better at rover. And then on Thursday, he just started all over again. I've kind of zeroed in on him on offense. I think that's a position where I think he brings the most to the table when talking about Ronan Hannafin. But the point is these are two guys that I actually like better on offense than I do on defense, even though I think they can play both. And Jeremiah Love especially, because I think Jeremiah is a bit of a project defensively. Like there's a lot he's going to have to learn. The skills are there. It's for me, it's more of I just think that speed and that size, because that's the difference in Micah Bell, right? Like they say, well, if you want the speed, then why don't you put Micah Bell on running back? Because Micah Bell is like $165.
Yeah, that's not going to work out.
Yeah, Jeremiah Love is about 180 right now. He's going to be 200 when it's all said and done, right? If not, 205, 210.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think he could be like 210-ish pretty easy, honestly. He's got a frame, so.
Do we have any film of him consistently catching the ball, whether it's 7-on or anything?
Let me try to find that, because there was I've seen some film. I don't know if it was game film or if it was.
I mean, anybody that's 6 foot or over that can really run, if you can catch, that's an option. I'm not saying it's glorified, but in today's world where every advantage favors the wide receiver based on the rule book.
Yep.
As we're chatting, I will continue to look for that as we're chatting. So
that's fun.
I think for me, if we're going to talk about a realistic 1-2 punch at running back, I feel a lot better about Notre Dame having a really good 1-2 punch at running back now than I did 2 weeks ago, just because of the potential of getting Limar and Love compared to Irvin and Limar, in my opinion.
While I'm thinking of it, Rico, is he the next guy that's going to make an announcement, or I don't follow it?
He's the next one that has a scheduled announcement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's going to make his decision on July 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way in hell there's not a decision from somebody that's on the board prior to that. Just good, bad,
whether
or
it's public or not is the
question. That's the other thing. I said decision. I did not announce anything.
I could see two receivers making a decision before Rico Flores makes a decision. I just don't think they're going to necessarily make an announcement before Rico makes an announcement.
Yeah.
That's
publicly. Yep.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. Now that they're not getting Rodney, what guy or guys might they go after that are going to be slots, if at all?
Well, I don't
think he could have played a lot.
We talked about this the other day. I don't think they're going to force the issue with that guy. I don't.
I don't think they should. I'm just saying, can they get another shifty guy? I'm not saying it has to be Rodney.
No, I think the only chance could be Brian is Micah Tease is the only guy. And
if they put him in a slot, I'm not going to argue.
I don't view him as shifty per se. Like he can be, but I think he's more of a pure receiver. I think right now Micah Tease is a better receiver than he is a DB. I think in 3 years he's going to be a better DB than he is receiver. That's the difference. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that one. But
Smitty, I kind of think that if Notre Dame does want to force a slot in this class, I think they would honestly just go after a different type, right? Like I know we're traditionally thinking of a quicker footed guy that can, run routes.
Yeah.
I think they would honestly think about maybe if they land Jaden Greathouse, you're a big slot instead of a shifty.
That's
slot.
Interesting. That has advantages.
But Brian, that's what I like about what you said too, is you didn't say slot, you said another shifty guy.
If you're 6'2" and you're shifty,
but he's not really shifty. He'd be more of a pro style slot. You know what they could do though, and this is something that again, it's about strategy, and sometimes you're not going to be able to fill every need in one class. There's just not that. There's not a lot of that. There's not a lot of Rodney Gallagher's in this receiver class, period, that are Notre Dame caliber kids. Most of them are outside guys. It's the Noah Rogers, Brandon Ennis's, Jaden Greathouse's, Braylon James, Cardinal Tate's. There's Tyler Williams. There's a lot of Jaden. I think I said Rico Flora. I mean, there's just a lot of outside guys. There's not a lot of slots, which is because what you're seeing is more and more teams are moving that guy to defense. Taking Xavier Bradshaw last year, that's a different conversation. Having said that, the unique thing about it is you've got to have some foresight, and this is something I feel that the best programs have, that a lot of the best recruiting operations have, that not most have. And that is the willingness to say no to a need in one class because you think you can fill it better in the next one. And when you look at Notre Dame's 2024 offer list, there are a lot of that kind of guy in next year's class. And some of the guys that I think could play the slot, like, for example, Emma Mosley. I think Emma Mosley could be a really good slot receiver in more of a traditional NFL style slot, but then you look at some other guys on the list. Micah Hudson could be that. Tyseer Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Ryan Pelham, the kid who I think is going to end up going to Oregon. No, I'm sorry. Jack Ressler is the kid I think is going to Oregon. Ryan Pelham's a kid on the list. Zion Reagans is a kid on the list. Jason Robinson, the USC commit that's going to visit. Joseph Stone. Those are a lot of slot type of guys that Notre Dame has offered in next year's class. There's not a lot of bigger guys. There's Nicholas Marsh, who's 6'3". There's Bredell Richardson is 6'1". Brian, he's going to be visiting in June, by the way. Jeremiah Smith, who Brian and I were talking about the other day in Texas.
Oh, no.
He's really good.
Jeremiah is whatever.
Yeah, he's 6'3", and then Ryan Wingo's 6'2". But most of the offers that they've put out in that class are guys who are more slots. And so that's sometimes, hey, look, there's just not we could take a guy, or maybe we could take a guy like Micah Tease, who we think is better on defense, and put him on the slot to fill a need. But are you really doing right by Micah Tease if that's the case, right? If he wants a shot, you can give him a shot. But it's very clear to me that next year they are shooting for a lot of Lorenzo Styles / Avery Davis / type guys. In the slot. And so maybe you get 2 of them next year instead of 1 this year, 1 next year. That's the other part of it too.
Bredell Richardson's that kind of guy, but outside, and then CJ, we'll take him to the slot that plays at CDS.
Right. He's pretty decent.
I don't like forcing it either, Brian. I mean, to your point, it's this 2023 class seems a lot more outside driven from a wide receiver perspective, but 2024 looks like there's a lot quicker guys. Because I mean, outside of it's like, are you going to replace Rodney Gallagher, to try to find that shifty slot? I don't see a lot of those guys in the 2023 class. Like, it's just a bigger group in general.
We still have some of those where I live, believe me.
Well, but some of those guys are either committed somewhere else, like Nathaniel Joseph, who I would have loved to have had in that role, but Notre Dame's not getting him. But guys that Notre Dame can get, or that are looking at Notre Dame, that's the difference, right? And
he was looking at Notre Dame hard for a while, which is weird. But he's a 4.0 kid.
Unfortunately, he made his decision, I believe, before the staff at Notre Dame had been put together. So,
and he can fly.
Yeah, he's right. I remember the first time you sent me film, and I was like, "Yep, sign me up. I'll take him."
He can go.
And it was a great pickup for Clemson because that's the kind of kid they needed. That's what they were missing on last year's team. They had a bunch of outside, trees, and they didn't have that. And they run a college spread. And in a college spread, you have to have a Hunter Renfrow type or an Amari Rogers / Ray McLeod / Nathaniel Joseph type of guy. And they just didn't have that last year. And it hurt their offense. I mean, who was the only guy for Clemson that could really consistently make plays against Notre Dame in 2020 in the regular season game?
That would have killed us.
It was Amari Rogers. Yeah. So that's the kind of guy that you need to have, and they didn't have that, and that's the kind of guy I want Notre Dame to continue to get. My stance, guys, on needing that kind of player has not changed. It's just that I don't know who that guy is in this class, and I'm not forcing it just to force it. That's what I'm saying. I still think that guy is needed, just like I thought it was needed last year. That's why I wanted Xavier Bradshaw. And if they would have got Xavier Bradshaw last year like they should have, we're not having this conversation. We're just like, they're fine. We're worried about that next year, right? And so hopefully they'll be able to make it happen next year in that receiver class.
Yeah. Well, I have to run to a fun Zoom meeting, but you guys,
you have fun with that. Hey, Brian, thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, man, enjoyed it. Enjoy your night.
See you, man.
So, Ryan, that is where Notre Dame is with running back. We talked a little bit of receiver, and it's a good pickup. I think as we kind of wrap this thing up, this is a good pickup. This Notre Dame is back to where they were a week ago, numbers-wise. But I think we can all agree that they're in a better place now. And I I think very highly of Cedric Irvin as a young man. I felt terrible about how it all played out. There was no, I mean, it had to be done. Just don't feel good about it. It's just, it's one of those things where you just say, hey, man, it's a tough break, but it made them a better football team.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at.
Nah, I agree. It's one of those things where, because Cedric Irvin Jr. was just he's a really good kid, and he was a good commit for them, right? Because it was just like everything was shut down after he committed to Notre Dame. Like he was all on board. So I mean, it was just unfortunate in that instance that it didn't work out. But like you said, I mean, we're not going to sugarcoat anything. We've been very consistent about this. I mean, I think that Jayden Limar is a better player than Cedric Irvin Jr. I mean, I just do. So you had to get rid of a player in a class, but in my opinion, you upgraded in that spot. So it is a very bittersweet, because I had developed a pretty solid relationship with Cedric Irvin Jr. And I even texted him afterwards, just wishing him luck with everything that was going on. So I hope he lands on his feet. I hope he does great. I hope he's a great college football player. I mean, no doubt about it in my wishes on that one, but I really do like Jayden Limar. You know, I've liked Jayden Limar for a long time. I think he's a good
You're a
football
lot higher
player.
on him than I am.
Sure.
That I'll be honest. Ryan, we both like him. We both grade him as 4-star players. Ryan just graded him even higher than I did. He likes him even more. I'll be honest. So if he pans out, he got it right more so than I did in this instance. So, yeah, it's a good pickup. So we're going to kind of dive into a little Q&A, and so we're going to answer some questions. Brandon, I saw your chat too late. And Brian is going to answer your question. He's going to jump in and answer your question in the chat. So because Brandon Plesner asked, and this is the one Brian will respond to it in the chat. He had to take off. He's got a meeting he had to get to. He said, what are your thoughts on Anthony Carey? He's a 2024 running back, by the way. Also, does Notre Dame have a chance? Besides Jarrett Gibson, Carey, and Corey Smith are my favorite running backs in the 2024 class. So, Ryan, let's talk about Till. So, Brian will be able to answer your question in the super chat, Brandon, but I do want to talk about how this impacts the 2024 class.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you do now is that you have to ask yourself, if you get a second back in this class, which is not a given. And by the way, Brandon, thank you for the super chat. Barring an exodus from your current roster, I'm not sure if you can go for 2 again next year.
Right.
So then you got to ask, well, what is your need? Do you need more of a every down back, or do you go for more of a Corey Smith home run hitter type of guy? And that's the unique question. And that's the one that we're going to find out from Notre Dame over the next year is what they prioritize. And so now there's a chance it could change. You know, maybe Chris Tyree has a monster year and goes pro, and one of the sophomore backs transfers, or there's an injury. I mean, things could change. But right now, just looking at the depth chart, you signed 2 running backs in the 2021 class. You signed 2 running backs in the 2022 class with Jabron Payne. And if you sign 2 running backs in this class, you're now talking about 6 running backs in a 3-year stretch. That's a lot of running backs. And then if you get 2 more in the next class, you're going to be in a situation where it's 8 running backs in 4 years. You're going to have at least 2 guys transfer out or go pro. And I think that just puts them in a really, really tough spot. Now, of course, it could be Tyree, because Tyree will be gone from the 2024 year, because he'll be 20, 21, 22, and 23, unless he comes back for a 5th year, which Tyree actually has the option for a 5th year because of COVID. His freshman year didn't count. So even though he won't have taken a red shirt as of yet, he would still have a 5th season. So maybe he does come back. But I usually you don't see running backs come back for their 5th seasons. Then you look at, Logan Diggs and Audric Estime. If one of those guys has a similar Kyron Williams type breakout this year, the odds of them being on the roster in 2024 goes down as well. So it could happen, but I think right now you need to figure out who's your best, who's your number 1, and go for that guy on top of finishing out the 2023 class with a Jeremiah Love and or a Richard Young, which, again, I love the fact that they're going for Richard Young. But here's the deal, what y'all have to understand. The fact that they've known Jayden Limar was going to go public with his commitment for as long as they have allowed them to say, okay, let's shoot for the stars now. I mean, we know we love Jeremiah. We know we love no pun intended. Big fans of Jeremiah Love. They really like Jeremiah Love a lot. Like, I remember I asked someone about, when I found out about Jayden Limar, I asked one of my sources, would Jeremiah Love still be a take? And like before I finished my sentence, I was cut off and like, oh yes, absolutely, he's still a guy that they'd want. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. But they got a chance to put together a really, really impressive class. And then Brian read the answer to Brandon's question. He says, Kerry really filling out his frame. He's shifty. He has great vision, Notre Dame type of kid. He does talk to Notre Dame. Spoke with him the other day. Long, long way to go with him, as it is the case with most 2024 type of guys.
Yep.
So,
I mean, and to your note, Brian, it's a little of an interesting situation for like the 2024 class because it's a really good running back class, it seems, right? I mean, there's a lot of good dudes. There really is.
your mic. But it's back to speed now, Ryan. So keep going. It's back to speed now.
Okay, it's back to speed. Hopefully that does not happen again. But I was saying,
it's not your mic, it's your internet connection. Correct.
Which is weird because it has been remedied for the most part. But yeah, we're so I was going to say the 2024 class looks like a really good one. We mentioned Anthony Carey. We talked a little bit about Corey Smith. I mean, there's a lot of dudes on that board. It's a really good class. So the question of do you load up in 2023 comparative to hold out maybe an extra running back spot for 2024 is an interesting conversation. I ultimately think if you can get Jeremiah Love and kick the tires with the Richard Young, I don't think that one's a long shot. I know someone asked about that earlier that I think I starred, but I think that you would take the talent this year because I think that next year you might only get one, but it's probably more likely to be a stud, right? Like you might have a better shot at getting a stud next year. So,
well, and I think if you can get a second back, and it was from your end asked the question about Richard Young, but if you can get a second back in this class, then it allows you to put more emphasis on getting that top level back. And the nice thing is they're in on some of those guys. I mean, I think Corey Smith is that kind of guy. Obviously, Davion Gaz is that kind of guy for me. Gaze, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce the last name. I think it might be Gaze. You look at the kid his name escapes me at the present moment, Ryan, but the kid that's committed to Florida State that's still talking to Notre Dame. I have to look up his name here real quick. I got the offer list in front of me. Cameron Davis. He's that kind of guy. He's that kind of guy. Anthony Carey can be that kind of guy. Jarrett Gibson, although I don't see Notre Dame getting Jarrett Gibson. Brian Jackson, I'm not sure how I feel about Brian Jackson. He's kind of a big hammer, and I don't know if that would be necessarily my top choice. Nathaniel Palmer, you said you've seen him and you like him. He's pretty good as well, correct? Didn't you tell me you saw and liked Nathaniel Palmer? I haven't seen him yet, so I'll let you kind of share your thoughts on that one. But of the guys on the board, Ryan, I mean, they've thrown out 8 offers so far running back, and they're all really good. I mean, that is the thing. They are after some dudes in that class. There's no question about it.
Yeah, Nathaniel Palmer, I think, is ranked as a 3-star, but that kid's not a 3-star. That's not
well, Jeremiah. Okay, so let me just interrupt you to share my thoughts on the rankings. So Jeremiah Love's recruiting rankings are just, again, just another example of why I think this whole thing is just getting just out of hand. So when you look at Jeremiah Love's rankings from On3, he is ranked as the number 102 player in the country by On3. ESPN ranks him 90th. 247 Sports ranked him as number 144, right? Lowest in-state, he's ranked 3rd in Missouri, 3rd in Missouri, 5th in Missouri. Then there's Good Old Rivals, who ranks him as not only a 3-star, but a 5.63 star, which means he's not even the top group of 3 stars, and he's the number 15 player in the state of Missouri. So, I just don't really care if a kid is ranked as a 3-star at this point in time. I'm over it. It's just the kid can ball. If the film is good, then that's all I care about at this point in time.
Yep. Agree. And I really did like Nathaniel Palmer's film. I think he's going to be a bigger back. I would say he probably ends up being 210, 215 at the best of it. He reminds me of, Brian. I don't know if he's quite as fast as Ty Chandler, but I get like Ty Chandler vibes. And I don't know. I like Ty. He's kind of a one cut type of back. He's not incredibly shifty, but he's got some burst to him when he hits the open field. And he's kind of a bigger back, Like at the best, I think Ty was about 210, 212-ish, somewhere in that ballpark. Like I see stylistically a little bit of similarities. Yeah. Ty ran like 4.38 though at the combine. He's not, Nathaniel Palmer's not that, but
Yeah.
stylistically speaking.
And Brandon says that Gay seems like a power back to me too. I think he is a power runner, but I think he's a different type of power runner than Brian Jackson. If you look at Davion, and I'm not sure if you've had a chance to watch this film yet or not yet, Ryan, but he is a big, 510 or 200, 510, 5'10, 210, 215 pound kid, but he's got feet. That's like where Brian Jackson's kind of he's really good, but he's just a straight ahead hammer, and which is fine. That's just not my personal preference. So maybe with Brian Jackson, it's more of a Brian Driscoll personal preference thing. Why don't view him as others? I like guys that have some shiftiness to him, but Notre Dame likes him, obviously, as they like the other guys on the board. He just seems more like a Bama back to me. And I don't know if Notre Dame's looking for a Bama back. That's not to say, oh, Bama guys. It's just there's a style that fits there that maybe fits a little better than it fits at Notre Dame and vice versa. And so I do believe, I don't disagree with you, Brandon. I just think for me that he's got some shiftiness to him. And to me, that's a must for me to have that. And we're going to answer some questions here. If you all have them, if you don't, we'll get out of here. It's all good. But we do. I did have a comment from Antoine, who's kind of, shaking things up a little bit tonight. So don't agree with a lot of what he's saying, but he said, good show. My assessment of your recruits is nothing personal. I feel we have to take good with bad. As a fan base, so we can learn good criticism allows you to grow. No disrespect to the Notre Dame faithful. I don't think that. I mean, Antoine, you've been in this chat long enough to know, and you've even made the comment that, this isn't a Homer site. This isn't a Homer chat. This isn't a Homer board and all those type of things, right? But the reality is that picking the day of a commitment to only talk about what the kid's not good at is not going to endear you when people know you're a fan of a rival. That's my only point, right? Like, there was a lot of can't. We talked about how he doesn't look explosive, right? So you can do it, but when you just jump into a chat like that and start saying he's slow, you got to understand that the fans of that team are not going to take well to that when your school was one of the finalists, didn't get them, and that type of thing. So, I mean, I appreciate you. We do. It's why we welcome you here. It's just, you just got to know sometimes if you want people to receive the criticism, then you better also throw out some, hey, he does this, and this. But yours was okay, buddy's got good vision, but he's all these horrible things. I think that was more of the issue with anything else, in my opinion. So Jeff Fluke says, other than SI, is there a preference in what recruiting service we end up with the number one recruiting class? I kind of like the composite. I still like that to a degree. I think the composite is something I like. I think On3 has their consensus thing, but their grading system is so weird. Like, there was a time when Notre Dame had like 10 commits, nine commits, and Bama had 3 and USC had 3, and they were both ranked ahead of Notre Dame's. You're like, yeah, it shouldn't be a numbers game, but that's a little absurd to me, So they're all kind of weird. But I think the 247 composite is still probably the one I would look at after the SI 99 rankings, which, as I've explained to people before, we do it differently when we look at the rankings for SI 99 because we actually look at them more subjectively as opposed to just a points-based system. We try to grade them and rank them all as they go. So we'll get to some more questions here. Ryan, they're starting to come in here a little bit, so let's pull that one up while we're finding some other ones. From Matt, 2011 GT. Thank you for the super chat, Matt. Always love the content, guys. Thank you. Really feel we need to land one of the other backs and get some receivers in this class. Thoughts on the Iowa kid? So agree on other backs. I don't think a second. I want to get your opinion on this, Ryan. I don't think a second running back is a need in this class. The only reason I want a second running back is because I want Jeremiah Love.
Fair. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I
agree. Yeah.
So do you think a second back in this class is a need in this for 2023?
I don't think so. I mean, because honestly, Brian, I mean, again, wasn't the hugest Cedric Irvin Jr. fan as far as him being the number one back in the class. But I mean, for a while there, I was just kind of like, if they stay at one running back, whatever, it's fine, right? Because 2024, I think it's exactly numbers wise. Yes. Not from a just pure talent perspective, from a numbers perspective, it's fine because if you want to save the 2 for next year in 2024, I think you're fine, right? So yeah, I don't think it's a pressing need. I think there's a couple guys on the board that you really like, and that's fine. If there is, go for the talent. I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah. Now, so I would like a second. Where I agree with Matt is I want a second back in the class as long as it's Jeremiah Love or Richard Young. I don't want a second back just to get a second back. It better be someone who's better than Jayden Limar, in my opinion. Like Jayden Limar needs to be the floor of your running back class, in my opinion. And that's not an insult to him. That's just saying if you're going to add another back to him, he better be really, really good. And I think Jeremiah Love does that. Or he better be a guy that can play multiple positions, which also brings that was why I like Jeremiah Love. So that's kind of where where I see that one. As far as the receivers, yeah, I mean, but again, it's still May. I know people are kind of panicking about look, Notre Dame is in a really good place at receiver right now, other than they lost Rodney Gallagher. That's a miss. Ryan wrote about it today. There's no spin in that one. There's no spin like, well, they're going to be fine. Well, they're going to be fine, but that doesn't mean that it's still not a miss because he does bring a very unique skill set to the table. There's nobody else on the board that does what he can do, and that is something Notre Dame needed. So we're not spinning that one. It's a loss. I don't think there's anything the staff could have done. There's not a thing that I can point to and say, well, let me rephrase. There's nothing this staff could have done differently. If they would have jumped on him way earlier, then they might have had a shot to get him away from the hometown school. But they weren't able to do it. But there was a very interesting article in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette today where he talked about his dad said, I thought for a while there Notre Dame was going to steal him. I'm like, well, that says a lot. When his dad thinks about stealing him, away, that there was a push for him to stay closer to home. But I think they did everything right. They just sometimes you're going to lose those battles, and they couldn't close. And it'd be one thing if they lost into a team that they're going to beat. They lost into West Virginia. If a kid's going to pick West Virginia, is it really a you problem in this instance? Now, in 2 years ago with Wyatt Milam, yeah, that was a recruiting problem. They didn't push for a kid they should have landed. This one's different, and so it's a loss. But they're still in a really good position at receiver. It's just they got to close. Right, they're in a great position with Jaden Greathouse. I like where they are with Ronan Hannafin. Mm-hmm. And if you're getting a recruiting class where maybe you get a Rico Flores as your fourth best receiver, you're doing okay. Because here's the reason I think some people are nervous about the receiving class, Ryan. And you tell me if you agree or disagree. Mm-hmm. It's Ronan Hannafin's recruiting ranking. Because if you look at the film, that's not a 3-star kid. Okay. And here's the other thing. Name me a receiver on the board other than maybe Cardinal Tate, and I'll even say not even that one because Alabama's not pushing for Cardinal Tate. Name me another receiver on the board that has Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, USC, Notre Dame, and Ohio State all recruiting him.
I don't have one for you. I don't have one.
Again, not everyone's recruiting him as a receiver, right? But as a football player athlete, I'm sorry if you're being recruited by those schools, you're not a 3-star kid. I'm sorry, you're just not. If one of those schools recruits you, maybe because they may see you as a fill in a need or whatever. But when all those schools are recruiting you, you're better than a 3-star kid, in my view. And his film is better.
That's when you go from being a guy to a dude. Like that is the difference right there.
Right. Yep. Right. So to me, Ronan Hannafin's not creating the buzz because of his recruiting ranking. But that kid's really good. And then when you look at Jaden Greathouse, they're in a really good place there. He's a top 100 caliber kid. Braylon James is a top 100 caliber kid. He's a top 100 kid, in my opinion. And then Rico Flores is more of like a 175 to 225 caliber guy to me. If that's your fourth guy, if they're able to finish with that type of class, it's a pretty good four-man group. There's no question about it. And then at that point in time, you just try to flip some stud that you like. You try to flip a Tyler Williams if you pick someone else. You try to maybe you can still convince another kid down the road who's a big-time player to jump on board. But if the 4 is still the need for me, I think you only go to 5 if it's the right 5. I've never felt great about going to 5 just because. And, that's why I was okay going to 5 if you were going to get Braylon James, Rodney Gallagher, Ronan Hannafin, Rico Flores, and Rodney Gallagher. Sure. But I'm not going 5 just to get to 5 because you're going to end up losing somebody and you're back to square one in a year or two anyway. So, but now the key, Ryan, and this is what you wrote about today at IrishBreakdown.com, is it's got to close. Now the board is there for Notre Dame to have a really good, one of the 5 to 6 best receiver classes in the country. In my opinion, I think yours too. Braylon James, Jaden Greathouse, Ronan Hannafin, Rico Flores, if that's what they get. And again, they got to close with all three of those guys, especially Hannafin and Flores. You know, it closes the gap from the standpoint of you're way better with that group than you were coming into the year.
Sure.
It's a good group. That's a really good group of players, in my opinion. It's a really good group of players. And it fills that need, in my opinion. It certainly fills that need of getting playmakers that you need in this class. And Brandon talks about Micah Tease. The thing is, Micah Tease wouldn't technically be being recruited as a receiver. He'd be more of an athlete that would get a shot there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Would be how it would be.
Yeah, I think the only hang up for that 4, because I agree with you, I think it's a really good 4-man class. It's just the diversity, right? Like, are they diverse enough from, because you look at Ronan Hannafin and Braylon James, similar, right? Flores.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, very.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to disagree with him being similar to Braylon James, and you'd say, well, then you have to view him as being similar to Rodney Gallagher. I mean, Jane Greathouse.
Right.
But he doesn't stand out as uniquely different from either one of those two. He has a little bit of both of their traits.
Yep. I would be fine with the 4-man class, though. Again, it's just it does put pressure on you for 2024 to land a super shifty slot, like a guy that's
one.
And yeah, exactly. So you need to get a Tyseer Denmark or a Emmett Mosley or a Zion Reagans, whoever it is. You need to get one of those guys next year.
No doubt. At least one, if not maybe 2. Because I think with like a guy like Emmett Mosley, I think Emmett Mosley can play in the slot, but I think he can also play outside. He reminds me a lot of a Lorenzo Styles type of player to me. Again, they're not saying they're the same guy, but Lorenzo can start at Z, he can start at X and be good at both of them, even do some W in certain looks. And I think that's the kind of the cloth that Emmett Mosley's cut from. That's a little different than some of the other guys who are more pure, shifty slot type of guys, in my opinion. Then his last question is thoughts on the Iowa kid. I assume he is referring to Charlie Jones.
Oh, yeah.
We're not going to get too much into that, but I've talked to a couple people about this, and I do believe Notre Dame is kicking the tires on that one. That is the punt returner, kick returner / slot receiver that is just entered the portal from Iowa. He was at Buffalo his first few years. He went to Iowa. Was last year his first year at Iowa, or was it his second year at Iowa?
I think he's been there for 2 years, I believe.
2 years? Okay.
I think so.
So he has a 6th year of eligibility because of the COVID season. And so he is looking to play that 6th year. I do expect Notre Dame to jump in the mix there and see if they can make it work. Where that is right now, I do not know as far as how far down the road they are, but there is interest there. And he is more of you're landing one of, in my opinion, around the best punt returners in college football last year.
Yep.
Like clearly, maybe a guy that could be your kick returner. I think that would be more debatable with Chris Tyree on board. It would depend partly on Chris Tyree's role and Jadarian Price. And then you're also getting a guy that can be a good slot receiver that has never been a high volume guy, Ryan, but he is a big play guy. Even at Iowa, he was a very high yards per catch guy, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, he was. And I think that the baseline is what you get for him, right? Like, he's not going to come in and he's going to be your number 1 or number 2 receiver, but he's going to give you depth, which you need, and he's going to be a really good punt returner, like really good. I mean, I don't think it's a debate if Charlie Jones gets on the team of who the punt returner is. I don't think it's a competition at that point. He's the guy. He's the guy.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I don't often say that, but I mean, you can have a competition. I'm sure that they'll try to have a competition, but it won't be a competition. He is very good, and I'm trying to look up his ranking last year. But he had what did he take 2 back to the house last year? Was it? Let me see here.
It was 1 or 2. It was 1 or 2 last year, but his yards per return was pretty nutty, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he was an impressive guy. I'm trying to look it up now. So as a receiver, he had, it was 2020 where he had the touchdown, punt return touchdown. Last year he didn't have one. He had a kick return last year. Kick return was last year. But he averaged 15.4 yards per catch last year and on 21 catches. Mm-hmm. Let me also point out that last year the situation at quarterback for Iowa was really bad.
Are you not a Spencer Petras guy?
No, that's one of the most inaccurate quarterbacks in college football. I mean, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Yeah, he's not that guy. He's not that guy. So, this isn't a guy that's like, oh my gosh, this is a phenomenal. He's going to start. This is a rotation player receiver that is a dynamic punt returner, is what he would be, in my opinion. So yes, that would be where you are. So he is a guy that I do think Notre Dame is going to take a look at. We have some more questions over here. Looks like we do. All right, Garen Knutson, how are we looking for Freeling? Any rough time frame for him, Ryan? I know you can answer both of those.
Yeah, as far as the time frame to answer that first, he's always been a guy that said that he'll go into the season with it, right? So that can always change, but I haven't heard any difference as far as what the timeline is going to look like. I'm going to be consistent to say that I think that they're in a really good spot with Monroe Freeling. At this point, I'm going to say it's either going to be Notre Dame or it's Clemson. They have to close on him, but I think also getting both Sam Pendleton and Sullivan Absher into this class, both Carolina kids, I think that's a great baseline to close on a guy like a Monroe Freeling. And I had an article today where I basically said that Monroe Freeling is quietly, outside of Dante Moore, the guy that no one talks about as much, but is a guy that is paramount to get into this class. So yes, I think they're in a good spot. They have to close on it, but I think they're in a good position continuing.
Yep. There's a couple questions about Charlie Jones. Brandon asks if he was a grad transfer. He is, which is why they could get him right away. So that was kind of my first thought was, okay, is this a grad? Because if you're an undergrad, the window to transfer and play right away is gone. But grad transfers can transfer and play right away, and he is a grad transfer, so he would be able to play right away. Brandon says, do they have a scholarship available for him? They're working on their scholarship situation as we speak. So I think one would come available some way, somehow. And then Brandon also asked about receiver, Ryan. If Notre Dame lands 4 to 5 in 23, will they take 4 again in 2024? It would depend on who the 4 is. B, it would depend on what type of losses you have from your current roster. But I would think yes, because when the 2024 class shows up, Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, and Jane Thomas are going to be seniors. That's how crazy this recruiting thing is. They're going to be seniors. Yep. So you're going to have those 3, Tobias Merriweather, and then if you get 4 this year, that's only 8 guys. And so, you need 3, and you could take 4 if one of those other guys is gone or something along those lines. But, you can start getting to 12 receivers on a roster. That's a little high. But you would get there if it meant you've got 3 guys that are gone after this year, and we don't want to have to take 5 again the next year. So I would say they would take 4 if it was the right 4. They would definitely be open to 4. I don't think they would need to force 4 unless there's more matriculation from the roster. You agree with that, Ryan?
Yeah, I do. I think 4 is still a number for next year. The depth is an issue still. So yes, I agree for you.
Yep. And then Matt was referring to a Jeremiah Love type of guy when talking about running back. And yes, Matt, in that instance, absolutely. Danny Cottrell says Notre Dame needs to get another Jerome Bettis. You know who else needs another Jerome Bettis? Every other team in college football.
Yep.
We're talking about a phenomenal back. I was actually watching last night. I couldn't sleep again. Shocker. And so I actually popped in the 2000 or 1992 bowl game, and it was the Sugar Bowl, and just watching Jerome Bettis in the fourth quarter of that game just rip through Florida, because people forget Notre Dame was losing in the fourth quarter of that game. They were down, I think it was 22-17 at one point in time, and Notre Dame just buried him in the fourth quarter. But it was a very competitive game for almost the entire game. In my opinion.
When you say popping it in, is it like VHS?
I'm sorry. It's like on. That's just the expression that I use. Popping it in, right? But it was on. It was on YouTube, I believe. I think I actually have that game on VHS.
Yeah.
But the VHS player is like right over there. So I don't.
I miss the VHSs, man. Used to tear up the tape, and it was great stuff.
VHS sucked because you would just like, oh crap, it ripped. I'm screwed. It's done. Yeah,
Yes.
they were. Or when worse is when you pull it out and like you see the string, because you didn't know until you got it out that it was like, oh crap, it's stuck. It was just drove me nuts.
Yep. I remember used to
Drove me
tape over
nuts.
things too, right? And then if it got stuck, then it was over with. There was no way to
Yeah.
replace it. It was just
Or
done.
somebody taped over something and you didn't know it. So you pop in the football game and you're like, what is this?
Oh man. Oh
Yeah,
man.
it was not fun. It was not fun at all. All right, I think that is it for the questions. I don't see any more. I'm just kind of scrolling through here real quick. I don't see any. Jeff Flukes asked about is that like the Kane Madden competition? I think he was referring to punt returning. Yeah, it would be kind of like that. Where it's that guy's going to have the job. You can call it a competition all you want, but that guy's going to have the job. There's no question about it. So I think that is it, Ryan. If you want to check the bottom to see if there's any more that just popped up, I don't see any more.
Nope. Just
top.
a great conversation about bed is happening. That was all I
Well, yeah,
see at the
he was pretty
bottom.
good.
Yes.
He didn't stink. He did
NFL
not stink.
Hall of Famer. So yeah.
And what he rushed for like 20 touchdowns his last year at Notre Dame.
Something
I mean,
like that, yeah.
so
Yeah.
he was pretty good at Notre Dame too. I'm actually going to pull up his Notre Dame stats because it is interesting. He never actually rushed for 1,000 yards at Notre Dame, but that's because he had Reggie Brooks on that team. But yeah, his never did 20. So as a sophomore, Jerome rushed for 972 yards and 16 touchdowns, had 4 touchdown catches. That's where the 20. I knew he had 20 touchdowns. He had 20 total touchdowns.
Gotcha.
He had 4 receiving touchdowns. And then in 1982, he rushed for 825 yards and 10 touchdowns. Now, keep in mind, played 11 games in 1992 and only 12 the year before. So that would have been a little bit more success there. But in 1992, he obviously was in the same backfield as Reggie Brooks, who rushed for over 1,300 yards and was, I think he finished 4th or 5th in the Heisman voting that year. Reggie Brooks did. So that's pretty good backfield. It's pretty good backfield. You also had, here's who else you had in that backfield. You had Lee Becton was a backup running back. Ray Zellers was your backup fullback. You had Rodney Culver was on that 91 team. He wasn't on the 92 team, but I believe I don't think Rodney was on the 92 team, but he was on the 91 team. Because I forget sometimes how good of a back Rodney Culver was because he just was always on such other good backfields. I mean, he was a good running back. He was a really good running back.
Sure was.
Yeah, the 91 backfield, you had Jerome Bettis, Tony Brooks, and Rodney Culver. Reggie didn't even start on that team. He only had 18 carries on that team. That's the other crazy thing. Reggie Brooks never had more than 122 yards in a season until his last year when he rushed for 1,343, 8 yards a carry, and 13 touchdowns. That's how loaded Notre Dame was at running back in the day.
Someone just said so good that Dorsey Levens had to transfer.
He did.
He did. Point. It's a good point. And he turned into a good NFL running back.
Yeah,
too,
he was good at Georgia Tech as well. Yeah,
yep.
I mean they were just so loaded at running back in the day, and they would recruit like 6 or 7 running backs a year because like one of them's projected to be a linebacker, one of them's projected to be a receiver, and this is a different era. So anyway, all right, that is going to be it, everybody. Thanks for joining the show. Obviously, big pickup for Notre Dame. Really, really good pickup for Notre Dame. I think that the class is back to 13, but it's a better class, as we said. Jayden Limar, really good pickup, really quality player. Really like it. And somebody asked about when we think the next public commitment is going to be. Don't really do that whole thing. I'll say this. I don't know of any public commitments left in the month of May. Doesn't mean that might not change, but we don't know of any that are going to happen in the month of May. I think a lot is going to happen in June. From a securing thing standpoint, there may be some public commitments in June, but July is going to be a very busy month. I think a lot of kids are going to kind of wait till July to do things, and that's kind of how it's going to be. And some of the kids already have commitment dates set, right? Christian Gray already has one set. Rico July 4th. Rico Flores has one for July 3rd. Now, kids could also change their minds, as we saw with Rodney Gallagher. He was supposed to commit on July 4th as well, and he moved it up, obviously, to May. So hopefully – I wouldn't mind if some kid wanted to do that. I'd be all for it. So as my man Mace K says, join the message board, everybody. You can see that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Hit the like button for this show. Hit the subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. Share this podcast and leave a 5-star review if you're listening via a podcast app. We would always appreciate it. And as always, go Irish. Thanks to everyone that was part of both shows today. We will see you all again 12:30 tomorrow for our Friday mailbag. So have a great rest of your night, everybody. Sleep well, and we will talk to you again tomorrow. Thank you all so much for joining the Irish Breakdown Podcast.